What actually are Mustangs? What am I actually talking about when I am discussing an American wild horse? What are we looking at here? We're going to dive into everything wild horses today, guys. We're going to talk about where they came from, what they actually are, and where they can be found. Not to mention a whole bunch of other interesting things that you may or may not have ever known about wild horses in America. Stick around through this entire video, tons of interesting things to cover. Alright guys, in this video we're going to be focusing on wild horse populations in the United States. And even though wild horses can be found in other countries in North America, such as Mexico and Canada, this is where we have the biggest controversy due to the sheer numbers of the populations of free roaming wild horses. Now the purpose of this video, guys, is not to give you a viewpoint of a specific agenda or anything like that. It's just to give you the straight facts about wild horses and the conditions they're actually in. Alright guys, to understand what wild horses actually are, we have to look back historically. We have to go 500 plus years back to when the first European settlers landed on the North American continent. Prior to that, the most recent occurrence of wild horses in the natural ecosystem of North America was around 11,000 years ago towards the end of the Pleistocene era. And back then, there were native wild horse species roaming the plains. They were part of the natural ecosystem. We are discussing a different case with wild horses today. Now, it's arguable that westward expansion happened at the time that it did because of the domestic horse, that it was the thing that allowed Europeans to make the rapid expansion that they did across this massive continent. Now, you can say that it was westward expansion that brought the horses west, but if you think about it, it was really the other way around. It was because of the domestic horse that westward expansion happened as rapidly in North America as it did. Now, in humans' history with animal husbandry, we have an extensive list of examples across cultures and regions of animals that would never live in certain places if it were not for human interference. So, for the American wild horse, we look to the Spanish Empire in the 1500s, which defeated the Aztec Empire around 1519. Over the next couple centuries, Spain expanded rapidly up into what is today the western United States. Now, it was during this period of Spanish expansion in the West that many of their horses escaped over time and would go on to become their own wild entity, the first free-roaming horses in over 10,000 years on North America. Now let's look a little further ahead in time to the westward expansion of the United States of America. Towards the end of the 1700s, the US was gaining more and more ground, more and more territory, starting more states, and they would eventually annex a large portion of the nation of Mexico, which would bring them all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, with this brought more and more settlers from the eastern US, and what did they bring with them? They brought European descent horses. And what would happen? The exact same thing has happened with the Spanish. Horses would get out and would go and join the wild populations of Spanish descent Mustangs that were already out there, and they brought their new genetics into those breedings. Now, we have to remember that this has been going on continuously for the last 200 years, all the way up until today, and it still happens. There are people who still go illegally dump horses that then become feral out on our rangelands. So over that long period of time, think about all the different groups that were involved with horses in the West, from the silver and gold mines to the US cavalry, Native American tribes, cattle ranching, all brought their breeds of horses with them, all of which had horses escape at some point, which would then contribute to wild horse populations in the western United States. Now, another aspect we have to look at this is the word Mustang itself. Now, I have no problem using Mustang to describe these horses, obviously, but I do think it's important that we know and understand what we are talking about when we say that. And I'm bringing this up because very often the word gets used interchangeably with others or just flat out incorrectly. For example, Mustang is not a species. A zebra, that is a species. Przewalski's wild horse, that is a wild horse species that is found in Eurasia. Mustangs, when you map their genome, they come out to Equus caballos. They are inherently horses. They can breed naturally with our domestic horses. So Mustang is not a species. Number two, Mustang is not a breed. Breed implies that we bred them selectively to be the way that they are. But that is not the case with these horses. They were bred by natural selection. Now, that being said, we have since domesticated many wild horses, and for organizational purposes, for example, vet records or certifications, we don't really know what else to call these horses. So what do we put down? We say they are Mustangs, and that's a commonly used term in the animal science world. So in that sense, it's not incorrect. The actual word Mustang comes from a frontier anglicized version of the original Spanish word mustaño, which just simply means untamed. Now, it is true that what we call these horses and how we refer to them affects how people perceive them. However, I'm bringing up these points to shed light on the fact that it's not so black and white, this or that, as to what we call them for a couple of different reasons. I would say it's not incorrect to call these horses feral horses. The word feral implies that a domestic species returns to the wild. That's inherently what feral is, and that is what these horses are, right? They are horses that, whether by our ancestors or today, escaped from domestic life and became wild. That is how we have wild horse populations here in America today. So for that reason, I don't think feral is an incorrect term. It is also not wrong to call them wild horses. They are wild and they are equus caballos. They are horses. On top of that, I don't find it incorrect at all to call them Mustangs, because I think it's an important callback to their origins on this land and the history of how they got here. So, where can you find wild horses today? Now, I know some people are going to bring up some outlying populations of feral horses that are found outside of the West, such as the Chincoteague ponies off the coast of Virginia. In this video, I want to focus on the numerous populations that are managed by the federal government and are found in 10 Western states. Those states are Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. Now, in this video, I don't want to delve too deep into all the hand that the federal government has in this subject. However, I do want to touch on some of those things in other videos. For now, it suffices me to say that since 1971, the federal government established the Free Roaming Wild Horse Burro Act. This did bring federal protections to wild horses as natural resources. Ever since then, the Bureau of Land Management has established what is known as herd management areas. These are locations where wild horse populations are managed by the federal government on public lands. Now, it does so happen that in these established regions, you will find majority of wild horse populations today. That being said, we are talking about free roaming wild animals, and they migrate wherever their nature tells them to, so long as nature and barricade allow them. Today, there are 177 different herd management areas across the 10 different states that I before mentioned. Now, with that said, one of the biggest misconceptions about the Western United States is that it is a continuous, ongoing, unbarricaded wilderness, rich in resources for no one to take except for the wildlife. And that is far from the truth. And while that might have been the story of wild horses in the 1800s and before, today and over the last 100 years, they face very different circumstances due to our infrastructure and our presence on the land, which is greater than ever. Today, the Western United States is a land of barbed wire and roadways and fences. And it's because of factors like this that wild horse populations can't migrate like they used to 100 years ago. And this creates population islands of horses that are actually fairly isolated from each other. This has brought in problems of breeding and inbreeding over long periods of time amongst certain wild horse populations. On top of that, most of these locations where these horses are found are not exactly the green rain-fed fields that you anticipate being necessary to keep 1,000-pound animals alive and sustained. Just quite the opposite. The whole point of the Year of the Mustang journey was to demonstrate just how tough these horses really are. And frankly, that's an understatement. You have to be tough to survive in a lot of the places where these horses live, because there is very little to make a living off of when it comes to feed and water. Most of the places where Mustangs are found, you would classify as desert. And on top of that, a lot of it is what we would call in the West high desert, which is the same as regular old desert, just with winter conditions attached for part of the year. So that's fun. Now guys, when it comes to evolution, 500 years is not a very long time. The 500 years since horses have been reintroduced to the American continent as a wild breed is a very short amount of time for the massive amount of changes that had to be made in order for horses to continue to survive in the environments that I'm describing. Wild horses are a textbook example of survival of the fittest, and the traits that you need to continue to pass your genes on as a domestic horse are not necessarily the same as the traits you would need to survive as a wild horse. Now guys, most populations of wild horses are not the largest horses out there. They are usually between 700 and 1,000 pounds, 13 to 15 hands tall. There are several Mustangs that are bigger than that. Denver's a good example, but most Mustangs out there are about belly size. So Yeah, they're not on the larger end of horses for sure. If you're a horse and you don't have good feet in the wild, too bad, there's no farrier, you're dead. If you're susceptible to disease, there's no vet, you're dead. All of these horses that have the traits to continue on, those genetics were passed on, and in just a few hundred years, we see a lot of different characteristics come out in our feral breeds of horses. It's for reasons like this that many Mustangs have the characteristics that we know them for today, such as bigger feet, stronger bones, barrel bodies, and shorter stature. All of these, in some level, help horses survive in the wild. Alright guys, I hope that was a good intro into what wild horses actually are, where they are found, and how they came to be here. I plan to do a lot more videos educating about Mustangs in America and all their stories. I think it's super important that as citizens of this country, we understand what these horses are and that we take responsibility as stewards of this land that they also call home. As citizens of this country, we will have to make decisions concerning them. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave us a like. Also, make sure you're subscribed because on the Harvath channel, we got videos coming out every single week. Also, if you guys want to support this channel, we've got merchandise at you'rethemustang.com. We've got You're the Mustang hoodies. This is our You're the Mustang finale. We've got long sleeve tees and t-shirts as well. It's got all the states we went to on the You're the Mustang journey on the back. And then we got a super cool design on the front. Super cozy, so make sure you guys go get yourself one.